on that farm. Her name was Betsy, and she was a milky shorthorn. And my husband, Merrill, already knew how to milk, which I did not. And so I became acquainted with raw milk, which I actually had not much experience with before, except for my father's hobby goats that he'd had for some years. But of course I was just as indoctrinated as everybody was, and mostly still is, against raw milk. So somehow or other, goats always got under the radar on the whole anti-cow thing and raw milk thing. So nobody was scared of raw goat milk, only of cow's milk. So we had Betsy, and her milk was so lovely, and her cream was so lovely that I forgot all about being worried about raw milk, and it just evaporated, that fear. And some years after that, we found ourselves in England, and there we had a Jersey dairy farm with 60 cows. So I really got a lot more acquainted with the whole business of dairying and studying a lot more about cows. And those were Jersey cows. And then we moved back to Maine, which is where I was born. And I've had a cow constantly ever since I moved back to Maine, which was in 1975. And the thing about the cow that I found out so graphically was that it doesn't just make a difference in your diet, it makes a difference in your whole life. It's like when you start to have children or something, it's just completely a different situation after you have a cow. And people say cows tie you down, and actually I don't feel tied down. I hate leaving my cow. I like staying home with my cow. You see, the cow centers your life somehow. It just has this property of bringing the focus back home. You don't feel so much like going down, and you need less money. People that are young couples that maybe she would like to stay home with the husband, the children, or maybe he would. You can often get along on one income if you have a cow, because you not only don't have the external expenses of going out to work, but you just don't buy as much food. I mean, really, when I go to Hannaford's, I go for household products mostly. Just it doesn't seem necessary to buy very much, because we've got all our cream, our butter, our meat in the freezer, because she has a calf every year. And once you've got the cow, there's three things that people will, perhaps you're worried about, perhaps somebody else is worried about. The three things you don't have to worry about, and one is raw milk safety. You can't get a disease from the cow that the cow hasn't got. So if you're thinking of buying a cow, and you can have her tested for any particular disease that you're worried about, and brucellosis or tuberculosis or something. Well, Maine is essentially free of both diseases in any case. But the other things that are considered milk-borne diseases, like salmonella and listeriosis, these are pathogens that enter the milk after it leaves the cow, just as they get on spinach after it. I find when I read these blogs that people say you have to chill the milk rapidly so that it won't make you sick. Well, chilling the milk rapidly is very nice if you want to have tasty fresh milk, but if you don't chill it and it gets sour, you don't get sick milk, you just get sour milk. Clabber, which is what many of us feed our chickens or pig, if you know, conditions are such that your milk becomes infected with something like listeria or salmonella or any of the other things, these are soil-borne, or these are pathogens that get into the milk in other ways by contamination, just through carelessness, or just like they get on anything else. You're not going to always have a completely sterile product, but in the case of milk, you're actually less likely to get pathogens, get sick from milk than from practically anything else, because when milk goes, as soon as the milk leaves the cow, and even before, there's some bacteria, you know, these are lactobacillus. The lactobacillus that make the milk get sour are the same ones that we're paying for when we buy yogurt at the store. And you get them in your raw milk products for free, and they're good for you just like they are in your purchased yogurt. And the reason many of us buy yogurt after an illness is, or having taken antibiotics, is in order to replenish the gut bacteria from killing them off with antibiotics. And your raw milk actually does a great job of replacing these. And as milk becomes more sour and develops, you know, it becomes an acidic medium, there are virtually no pathogens that grow in an acidic medium, which is sour milk. In fact, many people aren't aware that aged cheddar is, I mean, a lot of cheddar is made with raw milk, and even the FDA, which is very concerned about raw milk at all times, cheddar cheese, or any cheese aged more than 60 days, does not have to be pasteurized, because it's recognized that after 60 days all pathogens have been killed by the lactobacillus. And I think this is really kind of a great source of confusion to a lot of people. See, I read just somewhere the other day, somebody picked cheese off a little sample tray somewhere, and after eating a couple of cubes of cheese, he saw down at the bottom that it said made with unpasteurized milk, and he thought, I have eaten raw milk and I didn't know it. They didn't tell me. Well, you didn't have to tell them, because aged cheese doesn't have to be pasteurized milk. So that was one of the things that I thought was pretty important. And the next thing in these three things that you don't have to worry about is whether you and your cow are adding to greenhouse gas. I'm particularly interested in this topic because the poor old cow has been getting such a bad rap for adding to greenhouse gas. Let's see, show you the picture here. Cover of a recent New Yorker magazine, and they gave this very entertaining cartoonist gave the very center picture to a cow who's apparently emitting a greenhouse gas out the back, in complete contravention to reality. The only greenhouse gas emitted by a cow is methane, and it does not come out the back end. It's a ruminant, and methane is only produced in an anaerobic environment, which the rumen is, and it's a fermentation vat, and methane is a product of fermentation. All living things are emitting a certain amount of methane. Particular thing that concerns me about methane misrepresentation is that it's really so minor. I mean, in the actual amount that a cow gives off. You know, just look this up. The entire estimated amount of greenhouse gas, the combination of CO2 and CH4, methane, that's produced by the agricultural sector, and that includes everything in the agricultural sector that they keep track of in the EIA, the agency that lists these things. That's all the greenhouse gases from all aspects of ag. Is estimated variously at 14, 16, sometimes 18% of greenhouse gas. And of this, about 2% is methane. These are USDA and EIA figures. And of this 2%, 6% of this 24%, 6% was of enteric origin, that is from the gut. And of that, they had this much greenhouse gas, and this much was methane, but that's methane from all sources, including rice paddies and everything. Down at the bottom is the enteric contribution of cattle. It's like 1.44% of 6%. That isn't really very much, and it gets so much attention compared to the reality of it. But if anybody is really concerned that they are making an unfair and inappropriate addition to greenhouse gases from their cow, actually most of that in the ag sector is from these lagoons that they put all the slurry of manure in, and the CAFOs have these great big lagoons of slurry, and manure doesn't automatically produce any methane, but when they put it in a slurry like that and it crusts over, it creates anaerobic conditions that do permit the growth of the development of methane. So the lagoons are a big source, and on top of that, now they make lagoons for the CAFOs that have pigs in and the ones that have chickens in, so that these animals, which do not normally produce any enteric methane, are compelled to do it. I mean, they're de facto producers of it just by doing that. But sometimes people think that, well, if we put the cow on pasture, it would produce just as much greenhouse gas and methane, but it'd just be all spotted around the county and you wouldn't notice it. But that's not true. The manure that falls on the pasture produces no methane, none, because it's in the air. It's sitting out in the air. You have to have anaerobic conditions to produce methane. So manure that falls on the land is not a factor. Tell your friends. But you can also tell them that a cow that's on pasture is eating these forbs, which are broadleaf weeds, as we call them, and these all aid digestion, and there's very active effort to figure out which of these most effectively reduce methane production, because methane, although it's a negligible source of greenhouse gas or global warming, nevertheless is a loss of energy to the cow, because methane is an energy source. I mean, it's the same as natural gas. If you cook with gas, you're cooking with methane. So when the cow loses methane, she's lost energy that she could have put into milk or meat or whatever her job was. So it's important that she be fed in such a way as to maximize utilization of her energy and not lose it as CH4. And the presence of the forbs in the pasture make the cellulotic digestion more efficient. The agricultural industry is working very hard now to find which herbs and things work the best. Right now the emphasis is on oregano. Apparently oregano is tremendously effective at reducing the production of methane. I want to tell you one thing I thought was pretty interesting, and that was that Pasteur, who gave his name to pasteurization, was actually his real job in life was finding some way of making the French wine stop going bad. So, I mean, his real life work was nothing to do with milk. It was creating more stable wine, and he advanced the study of microbiology enormously. It really didn't exist before Pasteur, and launched the whole 100 years of worry about bacteria. And at the end of his life, he said, terroir is everything. Bacteria is nothing. In other words, the substrate on which your body, your immune system, is what really is important. That the bacteria are not going to be a serious issue in a healthy medium. And you don't hear that very much about Pasteur, but he actually said nutrition is the key to health, not killing all the bacteria. Because healthy people resist disease. And I think that maybe some have heard about the hygiene hypothesis, but I don't want to tell you about that if we don't want to run around out of time. But that's a new theory that's gaining a lot of traction, that states that, in the simplest maybe form, is that we're born with an immune system that requires education, just as our brain requires education. It's as though the immune system were a vast untrained organ, and it comes into the world waiting to be shown what to fight. It doesn't know which local bacteria it's going to need to be able to fight. It has to be educated, and there's a number of studies and a great deal of interest in this now. And one of the things that it was shown in a number of European studies, really, that people that are children that are born on a farm are a great deal less likely to develop asthma, and they believe this is because a lot of asthma is caused by the immune system racing around figuring out, trying to find something to fight, and that it actually is responsible for a lot of autoimmune diseases, because it's got to have something, and it'll just turn on you if you don't get enough barnyard dust in your face. And the women who had babies, the farmers, ladies on the farm, their babies were the least likely to have asthma. It could be because they were drinking raw milk. They didn't take that into account. Now, of course, what people have been talking about for years in kind of giving cows, both beef and dairy cows, a kind of difficult reputation, is the idea that they're competing with humans for grain. That somehow or other, well, that if we all ate grain and did not eat animal products, everything would be better. There would be more food to go around, some even say would be healthier, which I would say there's not much basis for that. But the idea that cows are in competition for grain really doesn't stand up to hardly any scrutiny at all. For one thing, your locally cared for cow, our cows in Maine, eat mostly grass and hay. And nobody's in competition for this grass and hay. In fact, they're the only ones that can utilize it. I mean, the sun comes down and creates grass and hay, and the cow eats it, and her amazing colonies of bacteria in her gut break down the cellulose and turn it into food that people can eat. As my daughter Sally suggested, it's like turning straw into gold, like Rumpelstiltskin with it. It's the sort of magic that keeps the world going. And you can't really say that cows are in competition for grain, because they don't really require grain anyway. They really require grass and hay. That's what they're intended to live on. That's what their whole point of having a rumen is. Another thing I think it might be interesting to know is that it isn't just cows that are breaking down cellulose. Every animal that's living on plant material is breaking down cellulose. They're all producing methane, actually. Every caterpillar, for instance. Termite mounds are great sources of methane, and they're also living on cellulose. Every animal, every insect, every cow, every elephant, everything that appears to be living on a totally vegetative diet actually has some kind of internal organ analogous to the rumen that breaks down cellulose, because nothing can live on cellulose except bacteria. Bacteria break down cellulose, and nothing else can do it. Not even Monsanto. They just can't. They employ resident bacteria to do it. So that's really not very well known, as far as I can tell. That actually you can see the heat coming up from termite mounds from outer space, because the insects are all clustered together. But all insects are doing it. And another point is that the grain thing is that the idea that by eating more grain and less other animal products, that people in parts of the world that are hungry will get more to eat. And I just think this is a pretty strange idea. There's a lot of food right now in the world that's going to waste. And how is it supposed that if I eat more grain and less meat, that it feeds anybody far away? It isn't feeding anybody now, and why would it feed them in the future? Because there aren't any governments that make it their business to just divide up all the leftover grain that I didn't eat and hand it out. It sort of reminds me of when I was a little girl and didn't like my boiled carrots. My mother would say, think of all the starving Armenian children. Back in those days, there was Armenians that were starving. And I would say, well, send them my carrots then. So, I think that's the natural conclusion of that argument, that eating more grain and less animal products will actually feed anybody. I'd like to feed everybody, but I think providing more cows would do it better than most any way I can think of. Because a cow is just such a perfect local animal. I mean, she can make a living anywhere the green stuff is coming up. She does it without causing you nearly as much work. If you really try to live on just vegetable stuff, it's an awful lot of work. I mean, it's backbreaking. A friend of mine recently, just a few days ago, was canning beet greens. She had ever so many beets, and she thought she better can her beet greens, and she managed to can 12 quarts of them, and it took her till nearly midnight. And her husband said, "You're doing an awful lot of work for not very much food, dear. Your cow is out in the barn generating milk that's worth a lot more than those beet greens. Why don't you come to bed?" So that's just kind of a little anecdote about the relative work involved in I mean, really backbreaking work to get a vegetable diet. I mean, it's not easy to, whereas your cow actually enjoys doing the work. She loves going out there to graze. She races out every morning to look for what's grown and doesn't charge for it. And it's so good. So, she's very sustainable. We read all the time of the various sources of food that we really rely on and hope to be able to get, like wild salmon. And as probably many of you know, the wild salmon are a beleaguered species, and there's really hardly enough to go around now. And right now, our government entities, our FDA, is trying to decide whether to permit genetically modified salmon. And I'm not crazy about eating genetically modified food, and many of us aren't. And if you have your own cow, you're really able to control what your family eats. And I think this is a pretty important point for most of us. It is for me, that we get locally produced milk, very local in my case, just out the door, and I know what she ate. And my cow is not completely organic because it's so expensive to buy all organic food. What I'm getting is food from here we got it's cob, C-O-B, they call it, corn, oats, and barley. And it comes down from, my dealer gets it down from Quebec. And it's not, he has it consistently tested, and they are not selling him any genetically modified feed. It probably doesn't support milk production as well as the Blue Seal 14 or 16% would. But I know exactly what's in it. It's got corn, oats, and barley, and that's all. A little bit of molasses. But when I can, I get organic feed. I'm going to just see if anybody's thought of any questions, because I don't want to take up all the time if is anyone who had questions.
I've got a question on cow breeds. I've heard people want to get smaller jerseys or even miniature jerseys for some of the smaller breeds. Is there pros and cons to doing that versus bigger jerseys?
Well, I have what's called a mini jersey. She's only about that high, and she freshened at about 6 gallons a day, but she's down to 3 now after a year. And I'm only milking her once a day. There's a lot of things to be said for the mini jersey, I think. The only thing, the downside of the mini jersey is they tend to be more expensive when you buy them. People charge quite a lot for them, so if you are worried, I mean, this is a real concern for people. How are you going to, what do I do with all that milk, you know? This is not something our ancestors would have found explicable at all. They would have thought, more milk, good, you know, we'll feed the pigs, we'll feed the chickens, we'll sell it to the neighbors. But these are things that are not always easily done for a single cow family. And we do wish sometimes that the cow just didn't produce quite so much milk. so that there are a lot of ways to deal with this, but it's sort of an individual thing. But one of them is to have a smaller cow. And there are some breeds that produce less milk. I've been exploring the possibility of the lineback, random lineback, they say it produces less milk.
Just curious, if you only have one cow and they are basically herd animals, I thought, does the cow get lonely?
Yes, she does. That's a very good point. The cow is kind of really unhappy if she doesn't have a companion. And if you have her right where you can see her and pet her quite a few times all day, long to go by, it's like it would with your dog. They'll become very attached to you. But you won't have her very long before she has a calf. Then she will have company. This is her little herd. And they do really are much, they are a herd animal, and they are much happier to have members of their own kind. Else have any sort of questions?
Does unhappiness have any impact on production?
Happiness?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
If she's unhappy or lonely or bored, will production?
Yes. Yeah.
Chickens
cows
sometimes
need to be kept happy. Any animal, I think,
Right.
it does better if it's happy. But the land-grant colleges have actually studied this factor and measured it, and they like they like to they like to have friends with them, even a goat. I mean, they often get along well with a goat.
Sheep?
Or a sheep, yeah.
Parakeet?
Any other animal. Cows don't get along very well with a horse. It's a very unusual situation where you can put horse and cow in the same pasture. The horse doesn't have to make a living the way the cow does. And the horse has upper... the cow... all you people already know this, but I find that a lot of people don't know that a horse has upper and lower jaws with teeth, upper and lower teeth, and the cow does not. She only has lower incisors and no teeth across the front, not I need. And so she's really can easily become a victim of a horse. Plus the horse is an athletic kicker, so it's usually best not to try to put them together. Anybody else think of any questions?
Back to those miniature breeds, is it difficult trying to either find bulls for those or AI for those?
AI is very cooperative about it. There are several mini Jersey breeders in Maine. There are several mini Jersey breeders in Maine. And my AI tech will go and pick up the semen and put it in his nitrogen tank and bring it to me when I need it. And it isn't any more expensive as a rule than any other.
Where do you find an AI tech? Just look under
Where do I find an AI tech? I'll give you the name of mine, Nathan Casaboom. I think he's in J. Anyway, he goes over a huge area. Yeah, he's in business for himself now. He was working for Gen X, and now he's just on his own.
How much How much land would you need to support one
To support one cow?
Yeah.
That's a very frequent question, and I guess it's kind of depends on what your pasture is like. It's 1 acre in theory will support a cow, but I don't find it is very often possible. What do you think, Kara?
I would say 1 acre, well, your pasture has to be really good.
Where 1 acre's what?
Your pasture would have to be really
It
really
would have
good,
to be
yeah.
really good to deal with it. I know
would
there's
say
some
5
people who do deal with use just 1 acre, and they do it usually by dividing it up with electric fence and changing the cow frequently. And it's not unreasonable to do that. And if I had just 1 acre I would certainly not hesitate to get a cow because I only had 1 acre. You can certainly keep her on 1 acre. You probably will have to buy in hay anyway, but on 1 acre you'll have to buy in more hay. But cows like hay. They get it all 6 months of the year in Maine anyway. There's no getting away from it, really. Yes?
What kind of shelter do you have for the cow?
Well, I have an ancient barn, but you do have to have some kind of shelter for any cow because they don't have much of a coat. And they really can't, well, if they have to put their energy into keeping warm, they don't have the energy available to make milk with. It's just math. So you do need some kind of shelter for them, at least a 3-sided run-in. Yes?
Do you dry your cows off sometimes in the winter?
Oh yes, I dry my cow off about 3 months before she's ready to have her calf, so she has a rest period, and that's what virtually all dairy farms do. They just, big and small dairies, they all do that. So you, if I left out anything of importance here. I think I left out a lot of things of importance, but because I could carry on about cows for hours. I did notice lately that there's been quite a bit of nice things written about the fact that that the carbon dioxide emitted by cattle does not contribute to the global warming. It's part of the natural carbon cycle, and it's been going on now for millions of years and without causing any global warming. And in fact, before we had dairies, why the country was covered with buffalo. There were more buffalo than there are in all the cows in the United States right now. There were more buffalo than that, by at least a third. And what happens is that by trampling the ground, as the buffalo did, and cows do on pasture, they just push the manure into the ground, which sequesters carbon, so that your pasture becomes a carbon sink instead of increasing the load of global greenhouse gases. It actually puts them back in a safe place, namely underground. And this is a really good idea, and I'm really surprised to hear recently some people saying, oh well, I don't think it's really happening. Of course it's happening. That's how the Great Plains was able to create the deepest topsoil. Some of it was 4 feet deep. The greatest mine of topsoil perhaps the world has ever known. And that was all done by buffalo pounding it into the ground. So of course they can do that. Anybody think of any more questions? Yes?
What do you do with all of your 6 gallons of milk every day?
Well, I make what's called clabber, which is sour milk that just forms of solid curd, like yogurt. And then there's a lot of things you can do with clabber, but what clabber does for us and for anybody is that it provides a complete diet for chickens and pigs, which can't live just on plant material. You can't have a breeding population of chickens or pigs without animal products in their diet. There's no combination of vegetable products that you can create complete protein with for animals other than ruminants. So by providing some clabber for your chickens and your pigs, you give them the complete protein diet, animal protein diet they require, and then they work for you just as hard as your cow. And then, as a last resort, you can separate out the whey or use the skim milk. And if you put this on your pastures, your garden, your lawn, your house plants, anywhere, it's a fantastic fertilizer. Nothing can exceed it. It's really amazing. And whey, for instance, just watered onto your rose bushes, they will astonish you what they will do. However, the main thing I do with it is skim the extra milk for butter, and for cream and make butter. You never have too much butter.
Do you milk your cows by hand?
Do I what?
You milk them by hand?
No, I did milk by hand for many years, but now I'm milking by machine. But
Is that one cow or a number of them?
huh?
Is it do you have a machine for just one?
Yes,
cow?
I do. Most of the people on I have a website with a forum of many people that have cows, just one cow, and many of them have machines. And there's actually a lot of companies that cater for just selling you a machine for one cow. It works just fine. I think you should still learn to hand milk though, because someday the electricity will be out. And your cow will not be out, so.
I'm just thinking he's like, it's not able to. It's my turn.
You see how we're doing. A little more time. If anybody thought of any more questions, and I'll see if there's any more important information I forgot to tell you.
Joann, there's one over there.
Oh, do you leave the caps on?
What?
Do you leave the caps on to suckle?
Oh, well, a lot of people do, and I do. I always let the calf run with the cow. There's a lot of good reasons to do that. I think Tara does too, don't you? It's convenient in a lot of ways, because pretty soon you can go to once a day milking, because the calf will drink the other half. And then another thing that's important about having the calf run with the cow is that the calf learns what to eat. Calves don't just automatically know what to eat without seeing their mother eat. So a lot of times people want a cow that will do well just on grass, so it'll be no grain. And you can't just buy a cow from a dairy that's been feeding grain to that cow all her life and expect it to go out and make a living on grass. It won't be able to do it. For one thing, it doesn't have the right microorganisms in its gut. So if the calf follows the cow, it learns what to eat, and it develops a set of microorganisms in its gut that will support it without a lot of grain. I don't find it possible in Maine to get along completely without grain. It's just too darn cold in the winter, and they need the energy. But a cow on an ordinary dairy will have mostly grain, and you can't just take her and put her on grass and expect her to thrive. It seldom will happen. Anybody else have any more questions? I hope somebody, oh yes.
How many seasons or years do you get out of an animal?
Oh, well, I just rebred our cow, Helen, who's 12. The dairies often only keep them 3 or 4 years, but they just get burned out with mastitis and hoof problems and so forth. But your family cow that's been nicely taken care of with you and your loving children will last for years. And they just don't necessarily just have to die. It's tragic. I think the way the large dairies just kind of turn over the cows as though they were a box of Kleenex or something. huge investment in each cow, really, and you'd like to know that it would keep you, your family in milk for at least 10 years.
We have a 21-year-old who was milked till she was 18.
What?
We have a 21-year-old cow who was milked till she was 18.
That's wonderful.
Wow. What's the lifespan?
Of a cow?
Yeah.
Well, more than 21 years. There certainly have been 30-year-old cows. I don't know if they live quite as long as some old horses I've seen, but they do live a long time.
Do you eventually butcher the mother and keep the calf then?
Well, some people do. I was kind of going to let Helen just sort of be a pasture ornament because she's been an old family friend, and I don't think anybody's prepared to eat a Helen burger right now. But most people do butcher them after they won't breed back anymore.
What do you do with the calves?
Well, there's always some, if it's every other one at least is a steer, and I keep it for about 18 months and then I put it in the freezer. I try to get it killed on the farm so as to lessen the stress. My butcher in Livermore, Castongi, will allow us to bring the killed animal to him. We field dress it and then take it over to him at 5 a.m. Who's sleepy? I think I'm supposed to stop. I probably could come up with another question if anybody has one. No more questions? Well, I'll bet. Sally, can't you think of something to add?
Well, you can always talk a lot more about Mitra and her amazing
Oh
empire.
yes, I should tell you about my daughter-in-law Mitra. She moved here from California only, about 5 years ago? About 5 years ago. And she was a complete city girl from Oakland. And now she's a complete farmer girl in New Sharon. She got the cow bug, and then she solved her problem of what to do with all that extra milk. She got her cow from Cara, and she solved the problem of what to do with all her extra milk by buying these chickens that grow very fast, and she feeds them on clabber. And they are so good that she's had a lot of write-ups in the paper by distinguished, celebrated chefs in Portland who say that her chickens are incredibly good. He goes to the farmer's market, and because of the legal requirements, she can't actually sell her birds there, but she sells chicken futures. And she breeds one after the other batches of these fabulous chickens and ducks and pigs, great, huge, enormous pigs, and she's just completely transformed her life and that of her family. They have this cute little mini farm now with Nellie, the cow, who is the driving force. The cow drives the whole circle of interdependence on your farm.
When did you write the Cow Economy?
Oh, well, I wrote that in 1976 together with my husband Merrill.
Right, well, you spoke at my farm. I'm Stacy Wentworth from Arundel.
Oh, that's you. I've visited you so often.
Yeah, and we got one of your books, A Definite Talk, and
That's just great.
and I'd had a cow for about 3 years before that.
Did you really? Oh, so glad you came. Listen, I want to read you something. I have it here. This is one verse out of a poem by Oliver Goldsmith, a 18th century poet. And it's one verse out of a very long poem that he wrote called The Deserted Village. Ill fares the land to hastening ills a prey, where wealth accumulates and men decay. Princes and lords may flourish or may fade, A breath can make them as a breath hath made. But a bold peasantry, their country's pride, when once destroyed, can never be supplied. Anybody needs one of my books, they're right up here.
What's your address for the website?